stop and just close the program.
Yeah. And so all I do is hit the PowerPoint and I should be ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Want it off for now?
I just put the shade thing in front of you.
Yeah, you can just pull it back. Let me make sure it's on.
Okay.
How does it?
Just that way.
Okay. So whenever you want to
It's
slide it
just
over.
these arrows, right?
Yeah.
You can see. Okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you.
11 o'clock. You know where the CIF culture, because your culture, implemented. So invite all the therapists.
Okay.
Because that's another complementary concept.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see you here. Can you hear me well? Yeah? I'll move it a little bit closer like this. I'm Gisele Fernandes. I'm here today with
Kathy Littles.
Yes. Hello. And we're going to be talking to you about inclusion and social justice in integral education. But before we get started, I want to invite you to fully arrive. So if you would like to just take a moment to find your seat and maybe wiggle your sit bones on the chair. And if you'd like to just close your eyes for a moment and notice how you're breathing this afternoon. Sometimes just by noticing, something begins to shift. So taking this opportunity to allow a deeper breath into your body. Notice the sensations of the breath as it travels down, expanding your lungs, your diaphragm, your belly. And perhaps noticing the support of the chair behind your back, under your sit bones. Notice the firmness of the ground beneath you. And let yourself relax into your seat, relax into yourself. And savor the breath. An opportunity to pause in the middle of your day. And to notice what's happening inside. As you notice the sensations of your breath, you may also notice presence of thoughts, perhaps of feelings, images. You may notice sounds outside of this room. And attempt to bring your attention to the breath. As the breath is a vital energy, it helps us rejuvenate, and helps us be in contact with ourselves and with this very present moment. as you're ready, you may gently bring your meditation to a closure and bring your attention back to the room. And perhaps take a moment so that your eyes can get used to the light again. And once your eyes are open and focused, I'm going to invite you to just look around and see who is here. It's not a very crowded room, and so we can look at each other and just make note of our presence here today. And so I have a few ideas to share with you, and my preference would be that I share what I have to share, and then we could get into dialogue. Perhaps a little reflection after, and then we're going to have Kathy's presentation and have a larger dialogue after both of us have presented. And if you do have a very strong need to ask a question or interrupt or say something, then I welcome that as well. So we'll just see how it goes. So the main idea is, so let me talk first a little bit before I get started. I actually wanted to just make note of this day and honoring Bauman Shirazi, who was the main organizer of this event, a dear colleague, somebody who served CIS for decades, a scholar, and a big part of us being here today is due to his work in organizing the symposium. So I just want to have a moment to express my gratitude for the opportunity and for his service and contribution to CIS and to integral education. So, integral education at CIS, as we know, honors the multidimensional nature of students' experience, intellectually, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It is about honoring multiple ways of knowing, and it has a strong commitment to social and environmental justice as part of our mission. Our presentation today would like to focus on the aspect of social justice as a central issue or a core value that we can think about education with that in the foreground. A lot of times, there's a lot of thought and preparation and attention towards academic development, course, curriculum, and then diversity. It's something that, and then let's add this. What it would be like if we start to conceptualize our teachings, our curriculum, our methodologies of teaching with the idea of not only diversity, but inclusion as a first principle. So if we start there and then develop things that come after that, would it make any difference? That's my invitation. That's what I'm thinking about. And that's what I would like to invite you to follow me in some of these thoughts and some of the things that we might encounter as challenges as we would, go towards that vision. When we think about spirituality in higher education, which is again a big core at integral education at CIS, the idea is that it's education for the whole person, meaning all different aspects of the person is valued in a spiritual stance. And one thing that we know in integral, we're talking about the body, the mind, and the spirit. And so if from an integral, from a spiritual perspective in higher education, we are welcoming the whole person, how come we have students of diverse background that come into the campus, or faculty for that matter, because I think we also heard that from faculty. When I come here, parts of myself, I leave it outside. And so this is where the invitation to have social justice and inclusion as a central piece goes along with spirituality in higher education. Because what we're talking about when we're talking about an integral vision of education or spirituality in higher education is to serve the whole person. And from a social justice model, I want that whole person to be here too. And so if I'm hearing from my faculty of color or from the students who identify as part of a minority group and they feel like parts of myself have to be outside, then I'm not doing a spiritual integral education because it's not attending the wholesome of what that person is. And so here, it's my point to you that social justice and inclusion is a spiritual stance. It's integral in its core definition. We're talking about the multidimensionality of beings, and we're talking about the interconnectedness of all the dimensions of being. So we have to take into consideration not only the individual, but the interpersonal, the cultural, the spiritual, but the cultural and the global. And so in the moment that a student or a faculty member walks into the building, my interest is not only in what that person holds and represents, but how is that then interconnected and related to us all? And so the attention here in the education and in the model of inclusion has to focus on the relationships of the student with faculty, with administration, because if we are indeed, like our founder, Chowdhury, talked about, honoring the interconnectedness of all life experiences, and in that he includes the interconnected of all these dimensions, then we are a global community. We are one human family. We are interconnected. And so in order to fulfill an integral vision, we have to be inclusive. He talks about all these different aspects of self as being part of a undivisible unit. And in his vision, integral education is the path for the evolution of consciousness. So let's think about that for a minute. He says, education is indeed the most effective agency by which genuine change of human consciousness and enduring transformation of human behavior can be accomplished. So clearly he saw that through education, people would change and would transform. And not only themselves, because if he's talking about a path to the evolution of consciousness, he's talking about, a more developed individual, and what does that individual then will do in connection to their manifestation in society, right? So if we're training people to be working, what are those capacities then? What difference is that student will have in its interaction in the world? So here's the piece, is a question. Could the diversification of who attends the Institute lead to a richer, more robust engagement with the curriculum in the classroom and a deeper, educational experience? Again, it's a question. Could the diversification of the student body and of a faculty body bring a richer, broader, more engaged aspect of education? To me, yes. It's a belief that I have. That's why we're here. We believe but what does this mean, right? Because in the moment that you invite more diversity in higher education, you will invite more perspectives, you invite more issues, you invite more friction. It's more complex, isn't it? Because you have more differences and you have people coming from, different perspectives, different cultural backgrounds, in whatever cultural background framework that means, will have more work. And so it has to be a very intentional choice of, yes, I want to diversify, because in the moment that I say I want to diversify, I have to look at what that means. Because I have to be able to have methodologies, curriculum, practices that are truly inclusive. Because otherwise, I'm just reproducing some mechanisms of oppression and discrimination that happens in society, because we are an institution. That's what we tend to do. And so the goal here, if we're thinking about diversity as an initiative in higher education, is to reframe diversity from a problem in society to be solved, because we know it is a big problem, to an education and civic asset necessary to create academic excellence and responsive democratic citizens. So we're not going to look at diversity as being a problem in society, but as being an educational asset. And if we go further than that and we think about Chowdhury's vision, he's then going to extend to, we're going to support the evolution of consciousness by doing that. Because what the research says is that engaging with diversity issues and creating an inclusive educational environment helps students become better citizens. That's been established in many other researches. And so if we combine the researches that are out there around diversity with Chowdhury vision, it goes well together so beautifully. In order to do that, we need to combine the forces of academic affairs with student affairs. Because it's not sufficient to have the lip service, because the more inclusive student body requires a more inclusive curriculum and atmosphere and educational methodologies and relationships and all of that. So it's an engagement with all the levels of the organization and of the student experience. And so I want to talk a little bit about the student experience, and I want to talk a little bit about the faculty experience and some of the challenges in that for us. And the perspective here will be, in some way, you know, some principles are broad to all faculty, and then some pieces around faculty of color as it's part of my identity. Kathy's too. And so, since early initiatives to diversify university campuses across the United States, we know that nowadays still campuses continue to wrestle with ways to meet the needs of a diverse landscape of students enrolling in higher education. Issues of equity, of access, and inclusion of students representing multiple identities continue to challenge educators in higher education. Established in the research, it's seen all across the board. So what happens to our students here at CIS? Let's take a minute just to think about that, because we know there has been a lot of attention in the media with large universities, you know, what happened in Missouri, what happened in Princeton. So that there's a lot of hostility in campus, and students have really horrific experiences around diversity. But let's focus on the student body that we have here and look at some of our issues, because this is our home and this is where we can make a difference. A lot of times students at CIS say they can't bring their full selves here, the way I said initially, and they don't feel accepted because they don't fit the dominant frame. And so the feeling of being less than or different. Other times, students have a hard time in feeling isolated or feeling like a only. And so students of a certain cultural background, that when they enter the classroom and they don't see anybody like them, whether it is their gender expression, their sexual orientation, their religious background, their race or ethnicity, in any or multiple domains. And with that, the experience is usually, in the best case scenario, that they feel like they're a token, or that they have to educate their peers around that particular experience of difference that they have an expertise in by having that as an identity. In its worse, the student may feel misunderstood or judged, at times invalidated, many times scapegoated. What we see in classroom dynamics here a lot of times is that sometimes when a student of a minority background doesn't feel that their experience is being represented in the teachings, the lectures, the reading references, the conversations with peers, that and they bring something up that, you know, other students first may not understand them, may judge them, may try to convince them otherwise of, you know, what they think they should be thinking. Or, and what you see very often as a professor, and I'm sure all of you who teach have seen that, is that other students may think that that's a diversion to the curriculum. Oh, the student is just taking time. We were here talking about this theory or this important concept, and here I have now this colleague who's taking time away from my classroom experience. And so it's usually not very validated. And so it creates actually a lot of friction in the classroom, in the relationship amongst the students. And so those are some of the issues that we see in the classroom. And a not so difficult thing to implement in going about that is for the courses to be infused with content that broadens the student's perspective, not only a student from a minority background, but for everybody. So special content focus on race, on ethnicity, on gender, on sexuality, on religion, issues around class. So nowadays, immigration, I mean, there's so much that it is important that is mentioned, is included, is being represented in both theoretical and academic material as well as in the classes. Now, here's the role of the teacher in these classroom and in this vision of being fully inclusive is the holding environment. So the idea is that the professor, first of all, has to have the commitment. I want to teach from that perspective. And Rumi has a wonderful quote. He says, if you are irritated by every rub, how will your mirror be polished? Right? So if you find it troublesome to have discussions and invite perspectives that are different because they will be challenging, then you can't do it. So what it takes in the first moment really is a commitment and an intentionality of the professor to say, I want my classroom to have those kind of discussions. I want the students who are underrepresented to have a voice. And in that, what do we need to do? First, we believe in the teacher's presence and embodiment. So your own ability to relate to everybody who is in the classroom. It's a first step. First is your commitment, right? So I guess will be the second step. Second is the idea of we're not doing instruction, we're educating. So the Latin term educare means to lead it out. Look, it's a very different thing because we're not doing a top down. We are inviting what is there. So there is a belief in the wisdom and the knowledge that the student brings and honoring that contribution. And so it is a participatory and inclusive curriculum because I have something to offer, I have an expertise, but I am also interested in the wisdom and the knowledge of the student and what they have to offer. And I teach in a way that brings that out of them, at least in my intention. I invite different voices, I invite different perspectives in their participation. And I also invite by offering readings that will reflect their cultural identity, so they feel more comfortable knowing that it's welcomed. Because if I don't provide any, in my case, clinical examples, clinical applications, working with a diverse population, if I don't provide any readings that will inform them that I am interested in that and that I want to have these conversations, they will get the message that it's not okay for them to bring that up. And if they do, a whole lot of things can happen because it's not set up that way. So then you have the conflicts in the classroom among peers. And then a lot of times faculty shy away from the topic. And they say, you know, I'm a white person. I don't think I want to do that. It's too icky. It's too complicated. How am I going to navigate these conversations? People are too angry. But because you have to set it up a certain way, so it feels inviting and it feels like it is okay to talk about. And again, you do that as you set up the course. And again, inclusion as a first central piece, even before you conceive your academic teaching. The other piece that we find that is important as faculty's responsibility, it's attention to the interpersonal dynamics. So calling out microaggressions, not letting the environment be monopolized by the dominant culture, what it's so called in the literature, the white fragility. Do you guys know what that term is? A lot of people don't like that term because it's an emotional process that sometimes students who come in contact for the first time with their issues around oppression and privilege feel so uncomfortable with their own identities that might be of a dominant, that it is from a dominant frame. And then they feel so emotional and may take up a lot of time of the classroom, of the discussions. And then students of color or students that have a different experience feel like their space, they don't have the same opportunity or the same space. And so that we see that as part of the role of the professor, to be able to facilitate the conversations and understand that it's not always a level playing field. So if the dominant discourse is stronger, the faculty will have to kind of swing it the other way and make room for other voices to also be present and to also be validated and to also be expressed without being scapegoated, without being judged or made it look like the problematic, right? Because it's not a problem. People of color is not a problem. The problems are what's being done with the dynamics around the discomfort of mechanisms of oppression and discrimination, right? So we can't blame the victim here. So it's a delicate job, but I think it's time for us to tackle it, you know? A lot of efforts have been made towards that, and I think as a society, and again, as Chowdhury was talking about, education being a path for the evolution of consciousness, that's where we are, we're right there. Also, as a faculty, we want to be okay with being uncomfortable, yeah? Be okay with the display of strong emotions if those come up for either way, either students of minority or a dominant background. Now, here's the trick. What happens to the faculty of color in this discussion? Because after all this stuff that happened in Missouri and Princeton, one of the things that we saw in the social media and in all the journals around diversity were students saying, hey, we want more faculty of color. Well, it is a complicated request in many ways, and I'll tell you why. Part of it because a call from a more diverse professorate suggests that the faculty of color simply by being brown and on campus can serve the institution in unique ways. In turn, when faculty of color are hired, they're often expected to occupy a certain set of roles, to serve as mentors, as inspirations, as guides, and to be the racial conscience of their institution, while not ruffling too many of their own feathers. It's a big job, right? It's a big job. So what the literature calls it the invisible labor, because when the faculty of color enter higher education campus, what happens, and it has been my experience, both here at CIS and at a sister school, I taught at JFK for 5 years before coming here, also as core faculty, and I've been here now, I'm entering my 5th year as core. I taught here before as adjunct, but you get more into it as core because you're more on campus, and this phenomena of being sought out by students of color as the mentor, as the guide, as the inspiration, as the one who they want to talk to, the one that they feel comfortable with. They want to assist you, they want to TA for you, they want to take every class you're offering, they come and sit with you when you're having lunch. I mean, it's very much, and so it's called the invisible labor. So there is extra work there, a lot of extra work for the faculty of color that is not necessarily validated or compensated. It's just invisible. The good news of the research shows in faculty of color in academia is that the love for teaching is the primary reason for their persistence. And so there is a very strong motivation to teach, to contribute. So I want to just name a few of the institutional challenges, and some of those happen in the institute, universities in general, and some of them in the classroom. And then I'm going to pause. But my invitation to you in naming these challenges, both for the students, like I mentioned before, students of minority background and their experiences on campus, and now I'm going to name some for the faculty of color, is to bring awareness. It's for that just to be part of what we understand, and that it's known. So, because sometimes there's resistance, right, for folks who don't identify as being part of people of color or minority. And, oh, what do I have to do with that? And why are they complaining so much? And didn't they want that? Now they're complaining that they want that. So it's not that, I don't want to go to a fixing mode. I want to invite just the contemplation and the awareness, so that the support can be there in the atmosphere. That's all, yeah? So in any way, I want this to be distancing or blaming, but rather an opportunity to understand each other's experience. And so what the research says, and some of us experience some of that, some of the challenges that faculty of color find is that their research interests or approaches or framework many times are undervalued, and that may bring dissatisfaction in their professional role. They may feel isolated. There might be unrealistic expectations of faculty during their work because of them being representatives of their racial and ethnic group. Accent discrimination, being a token person. The research also says there's extra burden for minority faculty, especially women of color, tends to have more of the service than their male counterparts. And that service is the additional guiding to students of color, that invisible labor that I mentioned. We are all called to diversify campus committees and to represent the views of a variety of ethnic groups, even in the most informal conversations. So those are some of the institutional challenges that you see across the board. In classroom, especially, it's very true to my experience here at CIS, and it's very validating to see that other professors of color have that experience elsewhere. It's that sometimes college may be the first time any students have been required to think critically and to re-examine their assumptions about race and racism. So what happens to a professor of color in a consumer-based model of higher education in a room full of white students who are hearing for the first time that the history that they have learned is complex in ways that implicate them? What happens? They don't like it. They don't like it. And they may have very strong feelings, and it gets projected on the faculty of color. And research shows that angry students don't just act out in the classroom with the faculty of color, but they punish them by complaining to higher administration and by filling out negative student evaluations. Mm-hmm. So it does take a lot of skill in order to navigate. And I have been here at CIS, I've taught the multicultural counseling class for now going into the 9th year, back to back every year. As an adjunct, I taught that class 3 times a year. As core, I teach that class twice a year. And so I am in a position of teaching students who may be for the very first time learning about who they are from a multicultural perspective and understanding what that means in relationship to other people, many times in relationship to peers, and in relationship to materials, in relationship to clients, in relationship to me, in relationship to the world. It's not a very easy process. And so it does require a lot of compassion, a lot of love, a lot of understanding, a lot of holding, so that they can move through that process and come out of the class integrated and able to get in touch with the parts that they don't like about their identities, but be able to look at that and to come to terms in who they want to be as an individual, as a scholar, as a clinician. So that's a little bit some of the ideas that have been part of what I wanted to talk to you about today as we think about inclusion, that we ought to be thinking about some of the challenges and some of the ways in which we have to just be aware of all these things that are happening and that we're working with. And when we have an open conversation and we have an understanding from faculty and students that I see here today, I think it's easier for all of us to be in it because we understand what the challenges are. So we're more equipped to be able to support each other and to better serve the mission. That is such a beautiful mission. And so I'm gonna end up with a quote from James Hillman. It is important to ask yourself, how am I useful to others? What do people want from me? That may very well reveal what you're here for.
Thank you, Gisele. It really provides a wonderful framework for what I'm going to talk about. I'm Kathy Littles. I have several hats here at CIS. Today I'm going to talk about my role as a faculty member here. I have been teaching in the School of Undergraduate Studies. It will be 11 years in August. And I thank Michelle Ng for being here, who has always been so incredibly supportive, who is the Dean of Undergraduate Studies. I'm going to talk about a specific incident that happened to me here at CIS in the classroom that really changed my consciousness about what it means to be a faculty here. And I'm going to be specific about what happened. And I think in order to kind of frame my experience, you need to know who I am and how I identify myself. I identify as a Black woman from Oakland, California. I was raised in a middle-class family. My family includes several educators. You'll see one of them, my Aunt Alice. My father was a professor in junior college. My mother taught at the California School for the Blind. So education is kind of in my blood. It was something that was very valued in my family, in my upbringing. I never had to look far for people to give me good advice. They were in my house. They were my parents, and that's what they did. And I think in so many instances, because of the framing and the holding that I had as a young woman, that really has provided the space for me to enter the classroom in a very specific way. And I think it's important, especially as my career goes on, that I'm honest about that, and I don't apologize for that. And so it has, in return, framed and structured the way that I teach, in the way that I interact with my colleagues and my students. So I always start my courses with honoring my ancestors. I think that it's important that I model that for our students, that we are not here because of what we've done. There are lots of people who paved the way. And so I start my courses that way. And I think it's important that my students know that I also hold multiple identities, right? That of being a woman, that of being a Black woman, that of being all of the things that I've named before, and all of the kind of intersectionalities of what it means to be human. And I think CIS is a wonderful space for those conversations to happen unapologetically in the classroom. I think I was making a list of the things that I know that I enter the classroom with. Integrity, honesty, empathy, compassion, and leadership were the top 5 that I came up with. Notice that knowledge or scholarship isn't in the list. I know what I'm teaching. I have the background. I read, what I needed to read in order to disseminate knowledge and information to students. But those are the kind of what I just listed, the characteristics that I think really not only grounds me as a faculty member, but it's almost like a responsibility that I have to the students and to the classroom space. And as I look at some of these words and think back on my own education, some of these aspects weren't held for me as a student. And so lessons learned as a student, as an undergraduate, when I was at San Francisco State and UC Davis as a PhD student, and all of the faculty that I had in the past really kind of also informed the way in which I entered the classroom. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to speak specifically about an incident that happened. I was trying to do the math in my head. I believe it was in 2012, and I actually have a slideshow prepared for you. Oh, thank you. So if you can go to the next slide, just one slide over. Actually, that's this one. There. So, Du Bois's double consciousness piece is actually a piece of writing that I tried to include in all of my core classes. I actually didn't do it this semester. Darn it, it's too late. But this is one of my favorite quotes of Du Bois, and I'm going to read it aloud because it really kind of frames my experience and the experience of so many other students. And one of the things before I read the quote that has been reflected back to me from students is, well, everybody can feel like this. And it's true. My argument is that there is something very specific about Blackness that places this quote in a very specific way. So Du Bois says in 1903, Souls of Black Folk, the Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil, and gifted with a second sight in this American world. a world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is this particular sensation, this double consciousness, the sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of the world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. Next slide, please. And the quote continues, one never feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two reconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. So this notion of a double consciousness really resonated with me many, many, many years ago as a student, because, and I can relate it to being a faculty member, because there's this idea of stepping into the classroom as a professor, as a scholar, as a teacher, and then for me, there's this other projection that happens without me saying anything. That, you know, as a woman and as a Black woman and as a smart Black woman. And so how do I reconcile that as I'm working through the semester? And it has presented itself in many, many different ways over the years. But the story that I'm getting ready to tell you now is one that sat with me for many years and really changed, as I said, the kind of my own kind of consciousness and trajectory about teaching. And I think it could only happen here at CIS, frankly, because CIS not only, the incident probably could have happened anywhere, but I think CIS, because of our mission, because of the holding of reflection and deep consciousness, allow the space for me to kind of work through what happened, I think, in a really wonderful way. So what happened 12 years ago, in 2012, going to 19, I was teaching a first semester class in the School of Undergraduate Studies. It was early in the semester, it may have been the first or second weekend, and I showed a film. The film is called I Am. It's a film about this gentleman who has a very lucrative career in Hollywood. He gets into an accident and has a breakthrough about the meaning of life. And he makes a documentary about it. And he interviews lots of different therapists, psychologists, historians, scholars about the meaning of life. Our 15-minute film, nice film. I asked the students to read this film like an article, read it in a very semiotic way. What are the images being shown? Who's present? Whose voices are there? Whose voices are not there? You know, to pay attention to the gist of the film, but to read into it on a much deeper level. And so after the film ends, we had a class discussion. And so most of the students liked the film. Thank you, Kathy, for showing us this film. It's the course so beautifully. One woman cried, so beautiful, thank you. And then my two female African-American students started to talk. And they said, well, fine film, but I have a lot of problems with it. Where were the people of color? There were women of color. You know, they had kind of a laundry list of things that they had pointed out that they took issue with, which is actually kind of good. They read it beautifully from their lens and their perspective. So another female student who identified as white and female starts to cry in the class and starts, frankly, berating the African-American students about their lack of appreciation of the general message in the film. And so now I have a crying student, two upset students, I'm literally visualizing the classroom, in the back, and a stunned class, and me in the middle. What am I going to do? This is 2012, 1912. So at this point, I've been teaching 4 years, okay? So what I did was call a break. Let's take a break. let's take a deep breath. Let's come back in 10 minutes. And that's what we did. So, before I said, let's take a break, my 2 African-American female students left the class. They got up and left. And then I said, let's take a break. And that's important that they left the room, because I'm going to talk about that. So during the break, I remember looking at the student, the crying student who identified as white and female, and she's got a couple of people consoling her. And I said, are you okay? Yes, I'm okay. And I said, okay, go take care of yourself. I'm here if you need me. Let me know if you need anything. I go out in the hallway and I meet my 2 African-American students. And the first question to me was, are you with us? And what they were challenging me to do was to align with their thought process. They needed to know that I, as an African-American female, was with them, that there was some camaraderie there. This is about identity. This is about identity politics, right? And so when I said that I was, oh, we're so relieved. He actually said that. We're so relieved. The second thing that happened was I said, we're on a 10-minute break. Take care of yourselves. I asked so-and-so if she was okay. She said she's okay. And the minute I said that, one of the women said, you never asked if we were okay. And they were right. I never asked. Never occurred to me to ask my African-American students, who walked out, by the way, remember, if they were okay. And it's kind of that, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And they were right. And I actually verbalized, you're right, I didn't ask. And, I'm trying to recollect whether I said this to them, but in my consciousness, this is what I was thinking. I didn't ask if you were okay because I knew you were. Because I knew that as women, and specifically Black women, that we have held so much, and that we were going to be okay, that you were going to be okay, that you had already created community with the 2 of you, we could talk it out, we've done this, we've been the mules of the community, the holders of culture, we're not going to let this little incident with the film I Am deter us. I knew they were okay, so I didn't bother to ask. That was my own stuff, right? And so, they come back to class ends, it was late by that time, and we went on to have a pretty rocky semester, to say the least. It's a cohort, and I've had many of them over the years that I'll never forget. But if you can turn to the next slide. So this happened in 2012. I teach 1 to 2 semesters a year. I remember driving home needing to talk to somebody, so I called my aunt, and she was able to calm me down because it really shook me. I was embarrassed. There was a lot of shame associated because I'm the faculty. I am responsible for holding the space, for having the language and the skills, and at that point, I feel that I failed them, all of them. And frankly, I felt that I failed myself. So with a lot of work, a lot of mentoring, a lot of self-reflection, I've come up with some possible learning points for myself that I'd like to share with you. Number one, I think it's important that faculty understand the history of trauma. There's a lot of trauma that all of our students go through, but specifically our students of color regarding education. I was one who was traumatized. I was one whose fourth grade teacher told me that I wasn't very bright in front of a whole room of students. But I had parents who were educators, remember? And so they were able to kind of wash that away from me. But what about those who don't or who didn't? And I think it's incumbent upon faculty to understand that a lot of students have trauma around education that they bring into the classroom. We see that a lot here at CIS. Knowledge of how we experience the world. My student who was crying white female student, experienced the world very differently, thus the reaction from the film, right? To her, it was a great film, and didn't understand the criticism, very good critical criticism that others were leveling against it. Understand how systemic racism and oppression operate in the classroom. I was part of that. And in fact, in a sense, I was perpetuating it in that moment because I didn't hold it the way that I should have. And most importantly, and I have to give credit to Joy DeGruy, who wrote that great book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She says that no matter what, no matter how angry you are, upset you are, you have to stay in the room. You have to stay in the room together to work through the process. I had not read Joy DeGruy's work. Otherwise, I would have told my two students who walked out that, kind of anecdotal story. But I will tell you, since I have been familiar with Joy DeGruy's work, been about 4 years or so, I actually make this line. It's important to stay in the room as part of my orientation on the first night. I tell my students we're going to be discussing difficult subjects, and you got to stay in the room. I'll be here. I'm going to be in the room, and I need you to stay in the room with me. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things that I absolutely love, we do a lot of bell hooks in the School of Undergraduate Studies, and she has this great quote: "When education is a practice of freedom, students are not the only ones who are asked to share, to confess," which means that I have a responsibility to bring my whole self in the classroom as well. And I will tell you this, I'm also known as a faculty member who establishes boundaries. That the classroom is a space of learning and a place of sharing. At the end of the day, I'm responsible for learning outcomes. And that's what I hold as true. And I can do that and do that. I can hold the learning outcomes and do the sharing and confessing at the same time without stepping over the boundary of the classroom becoming a therapeutic space. Because I'm not a therapist, but we have great ones here that I can recommend students to, which I have done, but not in our collective space in the School of Undergraduate Studies. At least that's how I personally choose to run the class. Next slide, please. So this is going to be a little emotional for me. This is my aunt. This is my Aunt Alice. She is a faculty member at Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas. She's a scholar in 17th and 18th British literature and rhetoric. She's retiring in December. And today, she actually sent me this poster 3 days ago. They're honoring her at Hendrix. Their semester ends on Monday. They're honoring her at Hendrix. It's probably over. It happened at 3:30. And obviously the top picture, as she said, that's me in my youth. And the bottom picture is her presently. She's currently struggling with some health issues. That's why she's retiring in the fall. And so her talk today is of her life at Hendrix College. And I just want to end with the notion of legacy and how I have embodied legacy in order to be present here as a faculty member at CIS. So Hendrix College, as I said, is in Conway, Arkansas. My aunt has taught there 36 years. Before my aunt was there, my grandmother was the cook in the cafeteria. She was the cafeteria lady, a single mother, 3 children in the South, in Arkansas. And the legacy that my grandmother, or the imprint that she had at Hendrix College, is something that my aunt feels every day as she walks through those doors teaching English for 35, 36 years. And so you hear what I'm saying about legacy and the importance of knowing yourself and holding up the mirror and being self-reflexive, about your place in the world. So last night I called my aunt, and she told me that grandma was born in 1914, and her parents were actually the first generation that was born out of slavery. So my great-great-grandparents, my grandmother, second generation, my aunt, third generation, and then me. Not that long ago, right? And so the historical and cultural trauma and scars are still there. I'm dealing with them every day. And frankly, so are you. So are all of us. If we are living and breathing in the United States, all of us have historical trauma that we can directly link from that slavery. And so today, she said she's going to speak about her life at Hendrix. And I'm telling you this story because she has had so much influence on me in my time here at CIS. But she said what she's going to talk about today, or what she talked about today, was being there for 35 years and being one of 2 Black faculty ever at that college. And the other Black faculty she hired in the English department. And one of the reasons why she stayed for so long, I've been hearing that she's going to retire for 5 years. And I remember her saying, I have to make sure that there's somebody behind me. So it took her 5 years to get somebody, so that when she leaves, it will at least have 1 Black faculty at Hendrix College. So she said she'll talk about that. And she said she will also talk about her recent letter that she wrote to the president of the university regarding how they couch their Black students in literature. So she said she wrote the newspaper, she wrote the faculty council, she wrote the president, because when they are out recruiting African American students, they put the word qualified African American students, and they don't do that for any other race of people. And so she said she will bring that up today in her final semester, you know. So these are the things that she struggles with, that I struggle with. But I think that, you know, because I have her and I have mentors and frankly I have lovely colleagues here at CIS, I'm able to weather the storm pretty good in the classroom. And yet there are days that I leave CIS very broken. And yet because of our mission, and because of us holding this notion of integral learning and integral education, I feel that I have the tools and the support to work through it, if that makes any sense. I've taught at Davis, I've taught at College of Marin, I've taught at Vista College, which is now Berkeley City College. And I don't know, maybe, but I don't know if I could have been as resilient and as firm as I am now in the classroom space had I not, you know, had the tools that I've developed here at CIS in order to become a more holistic and understanding faculty member. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning from my colleagues. I'm still learning from the edges that I have. I'm not perfect, and yet we do the work. And I think we attract a very specific student, which for me places me in the position to be really, really clear about these aspects of identity and boundaries in the classroom. So, thank you. I think we're going to open it up to a conversation. Okay. Thank you.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for you bringing up Bam and Shirashi contribution as well as Shari's school. I think you're demonstrating the very thing that's talk about, that you are more mindful as a teacher. In fact, both of them demonstrate the very thing you tried to discuss today. I think that's it's commendable. Secondly, I'm counting myself lucky that a long time ago I learned that I can learn from people that have been oppressed more than I can learn from privileged people. That's very big to me.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, and
Multicultural class. Yeah. When you talk about those first moments when students kind of become aware of the first time they're discovering this thing being held to them, they've been unconscious, now they're conscious. Do you see that by the end of the semester, they've been able to transition to like a new, better understanding, a new consciousness?
yes. I am good at that.
When
Yes.
that comes,
Yes, yes, because you can't do it by shaming or criticizing, right? And it's also not something that has to be like shoved down their throat. It's again, it's an invitation, and it is an inquiry of a certain positionality of a background. And I've had actually beautiful things. I had one time, I'll never forget that. One student that for his final paper, he decided to do a family tree, and he was a white student, and found out that his family of origin were slave owners. He went back and he found the land because he had a whole family that was from a certain region. It was easy to track back based on the family's land. And he found that, and his whole process transformation was around that. He came to terms with the fact that his ancestors were slave owners. I mean, I found that so moving and so beautiful for a student to have that kind of a courage to look into the history and to talk about it. And he presented in the classroom, and he talked about his process of looking at what it meant to him to be a white man, what it meant to him to know history and where his family were related to that history, and what does that do to him today, and how does he want to be in the world as a clinician, as a citizen. So yes, my experience is that people do take in the invitation and they do transform, and that there is a lot of opening and a lot of awareness. And that course in our curriculum happens in the second semester, so they're pretty fresh here. Yeah.
I don't have a question, but more of a thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank
So
you.
nice.
Thank you. This is why I continue to do the work I do here. Wonderful, wonderful faculty colleagues like this. And I am just really humble now being able to sit and listen to your stories. So we at CIS are very lucky.
Thank you, Gisele.
I second that.
Thank you.
I didn't realize that, that it faculty like both of you using an example of the integral philosophy. Every year during the orientation, I frequently come here representing the Cultural Integration Fellowship. And I frequently just remind them, I know being students are very busy, but by all means, get to know the philosophy of the school, because that would provide a context to make everything you study come alive and more meaningful. You know, you demonstrate that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. It was just great as always, and you both give so much to us. I have two questions. First, because I can never ask one. The first is in regards to, and I think both of you could speak to this. I think that Denise Boston came and spoke to the chairs and asked us to integrate D&I within all of our syllabi at the beginning of this semester. Of course, this syllabi will be so I want to ask syllabi and tweaking them over the summer to do this. So I wonder, is that project going forward, and is there any sort of traction around, are you getting people doing that? And do you have any examples for us? Because I want to be able to give my faculty examples, and not, because I think that there is a very specific way that you could go about this, or use different models or different ways of thinking beyond, just talking writ large about diversity and intersectionality like that. So any sort of tips and tricks sort of coming down the pipeline, not asking you to sort of tell or do that work now for us, but just wondering if that's moving. And then also, and this is where I'm going to ask folks to maybe just share your experiences, tips for holding and facilitating through that conflict. Because I've had those moments where I felt exactly like, oh my God, this is evolving into therapy, and I've had a kind of a panic, because I'm like, oh no, I can't do this. And so I've gone to one of my faculty who is a clinician, and she was like, okay, here's what you could have done. You could have named the present and taken a break, and kind of brought them out of it, and then did exactly what you did. But I just wonder other tips that you might have, or maybe for anyone in the room.
We, as part of the diversity committee, we actually did one time a training for faculty as a whole, and we brought those principles.
Yeah.
And I think we both touched on that. I think that when conversations become difficult, it is important for you as a faculty member to pause, not to take a break, but that you in some way bring your own awareness to body, to breath, to your own state of mind, and attempt to stay in the room, like Kathy said, right? Because, and to say, I am hearing this, I am hearing that, paraphrasing what every student is saying. And the other thing that I like to do is to invite everybody to speak. Because sometimes the conversations that get difficult, they may get polarized by, a student with another student, or two students in a small group. But, including everybody in the conversation, everybody has something to say. And so the opportunity to contribute and to participate at times can bring more nuance and can dissolve that, that tension, that polarization.
Whatever's going back.
That's right. But the important piece here really is your own level of comfort and your capacity to stay in the present moment. The other tip is not to be too anxious about what you have planned for the class during that day, and give yourself, and I've done that as well. I've planned all these things, and then I make that an open. So I say, okay, it's 3:20 right now. We have just 5 more minutes, so this is today, here, now. But for the students, I'll say, so I would like to have a break in about half an hour. So we can do this, and let's see. So I will time it. And if it's a process that needs that half an hour, and then I come back. So, okay, and I've done that. I've done that in courses that were, the process were really quick. We come back and I say, so here's what we have. I've planned this for today, and this is what I'm hearing where this class is at. I'm hearing the students are feeling this way, this is what happened. What would you like to do? Do you want to continue with the process, or do you want me to continue with what I had planned for today? I also make it open because otherwise I am going to feel anxious about, I need to make sure to teach this material, and I need to move through this discussion quickly because I need to go back to my class of today. So I relieve myself from that tension by making it an open process.
And not just
It's not only up to me. Do we want to go back to the class that it was planned, and this was the topic of today, or this is what we have planned, and it's a co-creative decision, and it usually works, and they can get into agreement of like, okay, we only want like this much discussion, and then we actually want to move on. I'm like, great. So then they can also, it's a way that they can self-organize and self-regulate.
Great.
So one of the things that I have done is to learn how to address things in the moment. So I don't give the break anymore when it gets a little hot in the classroom. I actually keep going. And you know what I've learned is most students just want to be heard. They want a space to talk. And so holding that space, holding that container, facilitating the discussion, I think the repeating of what I hear is a great, because they want to be heard, it's a great way to keep the conversation moving. And I have resolved in myself that it's very likely that issues won't be solved. And I'm going to have to be okay with that. And frankly, so are the students. We're not going to solve this in the next hour, okay? But, you know, perhaps next time, as I did last semester, I'll bring an article in to kind of help us kind of situate what's going on. But I think what students have reflected back to me is that they appreciate the space to talk honestly, with transparency, and they appreciate the boundaries of which faculty hold. So whether it's a time boundary, whether it's a language boundary, I'm big about tone. There's no blaming and no shaming going on. And when I hear it, and Rachel Bryant models this so beautifully. She'll say, I'm saying this to you with love and compassion. I would like for you to consider X, Y, and Z because it didn't land right. And so having the right language, timing, I think is important. And Michelle, I think it takes time. You know, we've all been doing this a long time, and I have fumbled many, many times. I'm not perfect, but I do think I have now the skills to at least hold space. You know, and students will let you know if you're successful or not, and you'll know it in your heart. Now, in terms of the curriculum, I'm sorry, Michelle, what is your question around the curriculum?
It was really,
it's the integration
yeah.
of cultural aspects into the syllabus. Share a few syllabi with you. I mean, we have a bunch that has been done already in our department.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I can send you a few
I
of
love to be
different,
flooded with that.
of different disciplines, so you can take a look of how it looks like.
Yeah, because I got an intro class, I got a theory class, I got all these classes that we need to integrate into these different things.
I can send that to you again.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. Anything
It's
else?
sincerity of both of you in itself is good holding place here. People understand that if you're sincere, they sense it. Because not every question you have to answer.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Oh, of course.
I just went out to writing up what you do and you know for the broader communities who struggle with homelessness because education is linked with evolution of consciousness, the physical. I don't think it's the same as others. And so what you two are doing is creating a new consciousness.
Yes.
I don't know if you're doing it.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because in researching, I found a lot of writing on the integral, and now I've found a lot of writing on the diversity. So the piece around integrating the two is actually fresh. So it is one of my goals.
Very, very new things.
Yeah.
And it's very alive and shocking in the sense of a new universe. And that's all this and non-public.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.